On a day that began like any other, the vast plains of the farm were destined to become the stage of a drama of life or death. A pack of wild dogs, driven by relentless hunger, has cornered a lone bull. His desperate escape took him to the river, a choice between the threat right behind him and the unknown danger of the current. But what unfolded in those cloudy waters challenged all expectations, shattering the predictable laws of the jungle. The ranchers who watched from afar thought that they understood the brutal dance between predator and prey, but they were about to witness such an unlikely, so impressive event that it would forever change their understanding of the creatures that shared their land. What could unite sworn enemies at a time of shared danger? The jazz answer hidden in the depths of the river, a secret waiting to be revealed, proving that nature is the greatest storyteller of all. The sun was emerging on the horizon, an incandescent fireball, by painting the backwoods sky with orange and purple, promising another relentless heat day on the dry and cracked earth. The fine dust, raised by an almost imperceptible morning breeze, danced in the air, covering the low and twisted vegetation with an ochre veil. In this scenario of austere beauty and constant struggle for life, silence was an almost palpable entity, broken only by the tinnitus distant of insects and the lonely call of a bird of prey. It was a misleading peace, the calm that precedes the storm, a silent prelude to the brutal symphony of nature that was about to begin. The pawns of the farm were already standing, their routines marked by the sun's cycle, oblivious to the drama that would unfold in the vast pastures that extended to where the view reached. Life in the countryside teaches to respect the rhythms of the earth, to understand their signs, but not even the oldest wisdom could prepare them for the pure instinct spectacle that has been evinced. Each dry leaf that broke under a paw, every shadow that moved stealthily among the shrubs was a measure in the survival music. That dawn was no different from so many others, but it carried a latent tension, an accumulated energy that awaited the right moment to explode. The smell of the wet earth through the dew of the night was mixed with the dry aroma of the grass, a perfume that for many meant home and livelihood. But for others, it was the smell of hunting territory, the stage where fate would be decided by speed, strength, and hunger. The now stronger sunlight was beginning to reveal the clear contours of the landscape, eliminating the shadows that served as a refuge. The day promised to be long and hard, like everyone else, but would bring with it an unforgettable lesson about the fine line that separates life from death. The apparent harmony of the ecosystem was about to be broken by the most primitive need of all, hunting for the next meal. The backlands, with its wild beauty and its relentless laws, was ready to be the judge and jury of this imminent confrontation. Suddenly, as ghosts emerging from the arid landscape, they appeared, moving with a frightening sync, a unit forged by hunger and instinct. The pack of wild, lean dogs, with a stained coat and eyes shining with cruel intelligence, sweeping the field as a silent and deadly wave. They were the supreme predators of that region, a force of relentless nature, feared by all other creatures that dared to cross their way. The leader, a larger male with scars that told past battle stories, guided the group with subtle movements of the head and tail. His authority was unquestionable, his command absolute. Each pack member knew his role, his position in the hunting deadly hierarchy. Hunger was a constant pain in their stomachs, a fire that propelled them forward, sharpening their senses and eliminating any trace of hesitation or fear. They did not hunt for sports or pleasure, but for the visceral need to survive another day in that hostile environment that offered a second chance. The wind brought to them the smell of their prey, an alley and strong aroma that made their muscles rush and the saliva drain from their mouths. The communication between them was complex and silent, a language of body postures, looks, and movements that orchestrated the siege strategy with lethal accuracy. There were no barks or howls, only the muffled sound of his paws on the dry earth, a stealth advance that aimed to surprise the victim before she could even realize the danger. The fury of the pack was not noisy or chaotic. It was a cold, calculated fury, a perfectly adjusted and efficient hunting machine. Each dog was a tooth in the death gear, a link in the chain that would close around the chosen target. They were the personification of the law of the strongest, a constant reminder that, in the backlands, complacency was an invitation to death. The energy of the group was contagious, an anticipation electric current and bloodthirst that united all in one purpose. The now higher sun illuminated its slender bodies, turning them into threatening silhouettes against the vastness of the open field. The hunt had begun, and the backcountry held her breath, waiting for the inevitable bloodshed. The pack spread, forming a semicircle, a living net designed to corner and confuse. Its movements were fluid, almost choreographed, each dog adjusting its speed and direction in response to others, slowly surrounding the unsuspecting prey. The target was a flock grazing quietly, but the leader's experienced eyes had already selected the most vulnerable, the weakest link. They did not hurry, savoring the moment, letting tension grow, using psychological war as one of their most effective weapons. The air became heavy, loaded with the promise of imminent violence, a deadly stillness that settled over the previously vibrant landscape. The pedestrians, at a distance, realized the change in cattle behavior, the sudden restlessness that denounced the presence of a predator. Their hearts squeezed, for they knew what that agitation meant. The pack was hunting, and they could do little to intervene. Nature would follow its course, brutal and indifferent to the desires of men who tried to tame it. The pack leader gave a signal, a slight lowering of ears, and the speed explosion was instant and overwhelming. The chaos erupted. The flock dispersed in a panic, but the pack did not make it fooled, keeping the focus on the previously chosen target. The strategy was clear: to separate the individual from the group, isolate it and tire it until the resistance became futile. Dogs moved as a single organism, cutting running routes, forcing their prey to open ground where there would be no escape. The sound of hooves hitting the earth echoed like war drums, mixed with the hangers' sharp and excited gannets. It was the dance of death, a relentless persecution under the scorching sun, a final test of resistance and will. The backlands, once a place of apparent peace, had become an arena, and the viewers, men and animals, watched powerless. The fate of a life was being sealed with each pass, each invested, with each desperate look in search an existing exit. In the center of the dust and panic storm, he stood out, a mountain of muscles and fury under a dark, shiny leather. It was not a young bull or an animal weakened by the disease. It was a bull at the height of his strength, a patriarch of the flock, known for his strong temperament and his imposing presence. His name, for the pedestrians who admired him at a distance, was Thunder, a name that honored the sound of his hooves and the strength of his thrusts. He had seen many years of drought and rain, had already faced other predators, and defended his flock with unshakable courage. His scars, like those of the pack leader, were medals of honor, silent witnesses of a life of battles and victories. But this time, the challenge was different. It was not a single jaguar or an opportunistic puma, but a collective force, a multiple and coordinated intelligence. He smelled death in the air, the pressure of the siege closing, and an ancestral anger boiled in his blood. Thunder did not run away with the rest of the flock. He stopped, packed the hooves on the dry earth, lowered his massive head, and released a deep and challenging mute. It was a sound that echoed through the plain, a war of war, a statement that he would not be an easy prey, that his life would have to be conquered with blood. His dark and deep eyes settled in the leader of the pack, recognizing the true opponent in that duel of wills. The pack, surprised by the unexpected resistance, diminished the rhythm, circulating it at a safe distance, testing his defenses. They could feel the power that emanated from it, the absence of fear that made him an opponent much more dangerous than they had anticipated. The bull was a symbol of resistance, a lonely bastion against the ruthless tide of the pack. His stance was that of a king defending his kingdom, a warrior ready for the final sacrifice in defense of his honor. The pawns in the fence of the farm watched with their hearts in his hand, a mixture of admiration and anguish. Thunder was more than an animal to them. It was part of the history of the farm, an indomitable spirit that personified the resilience of the Backlands itself. The tension was palpable, a rope stretched to the fullest, about to break. The bull and the pack leader were facing silent communication of threats and evaluations. Thunder swallowed my head slowly, its long, sharp horns shining under the sun, formidable weapons ready for combat. He snorted, clouds of dust coming out of his nostrils, his tense body like a spring about to fire. The pack, in turn, continued to move, its members constantly repositioning itself, seeking an angle, an opening, a fraction of second distraction. They were the incarnate patience, knowing that the bull's brute force was immense, but its finite resistance. The pack leader gave a subtle order, and one of the youngest and most impetuous dogs advanced, pretending an attack by the rear. Thunder, without diverting the leader's gaze, turned the body with surprising agility for an animal of its size, and the onslaught was received with a powerful kick that launched the dog away. The dog backed by, gaining in pain and surprise, a lesson learned the most difficult way. The maneuver served to test the bull's reactions and to remember the pack of the danger that each invested pose. The impasse continued, a deadly chess game under the midday sun, where each movement was calculated and each error could be fatal. Thunder could not afford to get tired of useless onslaught. He needed to keep his energy, wait for the right time to attack, or find an escape route. The dust was slowly based, revealing the frozen scene in time. The lone bull in the center, the hungry pack forming a circle of death around it. It was the embodiment of the individual struggle against collective oppression, a drama that has been repeated in nature since the beginning of time. For the men who attended, it was a lesson of courage, an image that would be recorded in their minds forever. Thunder resistance was an act of challenge against his own destiny, a silent cry that he would not surrender without fighting. The pack changed tactics. Instead of direct attacks, they started a series of quick onslaught and setbacks, biting the flanks and the rear Thunder's paws. They were small, superficial, but designed to bleed, to irritate, to undermine the resistance of the bull to the gout. Each bite was like a painful and unnerving needle, forcing the bull to move constantly, to rotate, to spend his precious energy. Thunder roared of fury and pain, trying to hit the agile aggressors who danced around them, always out of reach of their deadly horns. The blood began to drain through its flanks, staining its dark and attracting flies, adding another torment to its trial. He knew he could not support that defense for a long time. Blood loss and constant effort were weakening it every minute. The circle of the pack closed a little more with each successful attack, the confidence of dogs growing as the bull's force diminished. Hope began to fade from the eyes of Thunder, replaced by a dark and desperate determination. He needed a way out, a change in the battlefield, something that could turn the game to his advantage. His eyes swept the landscape, passing through the shrubs, the distant trees, and then he saw the river, a wide and silver strip of water shining in the distance, a promise of refuge or a different end. Water represented an obstacle to the pack, a terrain where its agility and group tactics would be less effective. A new, fragile but real hope emerged in his tired heart. It was a risky bet, a desperate race, but it was his only chance. Gathering his remaining forces, Thunder released one last mute of challenge, no longer directed at the pack, but to his own destiny. And then he ran, not blindly panic, but with a clear purpose towards the sparkling salvation of the river. The pack, it takes surprise by the sudden change of strategy, hesitated for a moment before resuming the persecution with renewed fury. The race for life began, an explosion of speed and dust that tore the stillness of the afternoon. Thunder, driven by adrenaline and despair, ran like never before, his massive body devouring the distance that separated him from the river. The sound of his hooves was continuous thunder, a frantic rhythm that marked his desperate escape from the certain death that pursued him. The pack came close, a mass of muscles and teeth, its hunting gannets echoing through the plain like a demonic chorus. They were faster, more agile, and slowly began to decrease the distance, their jaws approaching dangerously to the Taurus' heels. Thunder could feel the hot breath of his persecutors. He could hear the crack of his jaws, and that only propelled him to run faster. The river was getting closer and closer, its surface shining like a portal to another world, a water sanctuary. The smell of water and vegetation of the margin filled his nostrils, an aroma of life that contrasted with the smell of blood and death that surrounded him. He did not think about the dangers the river could hide, the chains, the holes, other predators. At that moment, anything was better than the pack of the pack. The pedestrians watched the scene unfold with a mixture of horror and fascination, silently twisting the bull that refused to die. The riverbank was a steep ravine, a last barrier to overcome. Thunder did not hesitate. With a last monumental effort, he launched himself from the ravine, his huge body flying through the air for a brief and suspended moment. The impact on the water was tremendous, an explosion of foam and sound that reverberated through the landscape. For a moment he disappeared under the cloudy surface, and a silence fell over the scene, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The pack stopped sharply on the edge of the ravine, barking in frustration and confusion, its prey suddenly out of reach. The persecution on the earth was over. A new struggle, in a completely different element, was just beginning. The head of Thunder emerged from the water, his wide eyes, his body fighting the temperature shock and the force of the current. Cold water was a relief for its injuries and its body overheated, but also represented a new and formidable challenge. He was not a natural swimmer. His heavy, muscular body was not made for fluctuation, and he struggled to keep his head above the surface. The current was strong, pulling it into the middle of the river, away from the safe margin he wanted to achieve. Wild dogs remained on the sidelines, running around, barking furiously, divided between the instinct of chase and the instinctive fear of deep water. They watched the bull fight, perhaps waiting for him to drown or be dragged back to the bank, where they could end what they started. Thunder ignored them, concentrating all their energy and will in every beat of their paws, in every breathless breath. The other margin looked like a distant mirage, a security dream that walked away with every second he was fighting the river. The dive was an act of despair, a jump in the unknown, and now he faced the consequences of his choice. The agony was stamped on his face, the struggle for survival recorded in each tense muscle, in every desperate look at the opposite bank. The pedestrians, which had run to a better point of observation, watched the scene in silence, their hopes decreasing every moment. It seemed that Thunder had only exchanged one form of death for another, escaping from the pack of the pack to surrender to the cold and relentless embrace of the river. The river of uncertainty was charging its price, testing the boundaries of the bull's resistance in a way that even the pack did not even. The sun hit the water, creating overshadowing reflexes that made it difficult for vision by adding an element of disorientation to its struggle. He was alone, completely alone, in the midst of a vast and indifferent body of water, and the force was beginning to abandon its tired limbs. The agonizing dive in the river was the climax of his trial, the point where the destination would finally decide his direction. The pawns on the edge of the ranch arrested their breath, his fixed eyes on the lonely figure of the bull fighting in the turbulent waters. Each Thunder movement was a Herculean effort, a battle against exhaustion and a relentless current that threatened to drag it into the background. The pack, still on the bank of which they left, looked like a set of frustrated viewers, their hunt interrupted by an element they could not dominate. His barks echoed over the water, a sound that seemed to mock the bull's struggle, but also carried a note of impotence. The distance to another margin did not decrease. For each meter that Thunder advanced, the chain dragged him 2 meters to the side. Panic began to settle in his eyes, the understanding that his desperate bet could have been a fatal error. The river, which looked like a promise of salvation, was proving to be a liquid, cold, and indifferent trap to its will to live. The men looked at each other, a feeling of helplessness and shared sadness passing between them. They were witnesses of an inevitable tragedy. Thunder was the heart of the farm, an animal that represented strength and tenacity, and seeing it, on the verge of defeat, was bleak. But then something changed. One of the pawns, the oldest and most experienced, with eyes used to reading the secrets of the river, frowned. He pointed with his chin, a subtle gesture, and the others followed his gaze. The surface of the water, a few meters from the bull, was no longer smooth. A strange ripple, which was not caused by the wind or the current, was deliberately moved toward Thunder. At first it was almost imperceptible, a subtle disturbance in Barrena water, but it was growing, becoming more defined. It was not a floating branch, nor a fish jumping. It was something big, something alive, moving with a sinister purpose just below the surface. Whatever it was, he was approaching the exhausted bull with a constant and scary speed. Everyone's attention, including dogs on the bank, was suddenly diverted from the Thunder struggle to that new and mysterious presence in the river. The air became even heavier, loaded no longer just with a hunting tension, but with a new kind of fear, a primary fear of the unknown. The ripple in the water turned into a visible treadmill, cutting the surface toward the bull, which in its desperate struggle had not yet realized the new threat. The packs of the pack on the margin changed their tone, moving from frustration to an acute and genuine alarm sound. Dogs, with their instincts cleared, felt the presence of a much older and more formidable predator than them. Suddenly, a few meters from Thunder, the surface of the water broke, and what emerged from the deep made the blood of all freeze. It was not a fish nor an otter. It was the massive and reptilian head of an alligator, a monster of the waters, a predator from the top of the river food chain. His eyes, cold and devoid of emotion, settled in the struggling bull, seeing not a brave fighter, but an easy and abundant meal. The alligator's body, long, covered with a dark scales armor, slid to the surface, revealing its impressive size, much larger than anyone would imagine in those waters. The river, which had been a refuge, has become instantly into the arena of a hunter much more lethal than the pack on land. The scene was surreal. On land, wild dogs, fearful predators. Now they looked like mere scared viewers. In the water, the exhausted bull, which had just escaped death, was now facing an even more terrible destination. And among them, the supreme predator of the river, the king of his dominion, emerging to complain what he considered his by right. The pedestrians were gaping, completely stunned. They knew the river, fishing in their waters, but had never seen a creature of that size. The presence of alligator explained many things. The occasional disappearance of calves that were too close to water, the instinctive respect that older animals had on the shore. What was about to happen was the law of nature in its crude and spectacular form, a confrontation of titans that no one could have predicted. The bull finally realized the sinister presence by its side. Panic in his eyes was replaced by a pure and absolute terror. The alligator moved with a deadly grace, slowly circulating Thunder, evaluating his prey with millennial patience. Each movement was deliberate, efficient, the action of a hunter who had no doubt about the result of the meeting. The bull, paralyzed by fear and exhaustion, only floated, his heavy body being an anchor that prevented him from any effective escape maneuver. The water around him seemed to boil with the tension, the silence broken only by the sound of his panting breathing and the smooth ripping of the alligator's tail. Dogs on the shore, which were once the embodiment of the threat, now barked in a mixture of nervous excitement and fear. His hunting had been stolen, but the thief was a force they would not dare to challenge directly. The alligator opened his huge jaws, revealing a row of sharp teeth, designed to grasp and drown, not to cut. The sound of his jaws closing in the air, a hollow snap, was a warning, a demonstration of power that needed no more explanations. Thunder, gathering a last remnant of his struggle spirit, tried to turn around, tried to introduce his horns to the new enemy. But in the water, he was clumsy and slow. The depth predator was in no hurry. He knew that the prey was stuck, tired, and in its territory. Time was in your favor. The pedestrians watched, mesmerized by the horrible drama. It was like watching a nightmare becoming reality before his eyes. They felt small and insignificant in the face of that exhibition of natural power, a memory of their true place in the wild world. The river, which was moments before it was just a landscape, now revealed its true nature, a complex and dangerous ecosystem, with its own kings and its own rules. The alligator began to approach, his body sliding through the water with a frightening efficiency, reducing the circle around the terrified bull. The moment of the attack was imminent. The silence was absolute. The world seemed to have stopped to watch the tragedy climax. Death, which thunder had deceived on land, had come to pursue him in the water, in the form of a reptilian nightmare. It was in this moment of suspended silence and terror that the unthinkable happened, the event that would leave everyone, men and animals, completely stunned. When the alligator was preparing for the final onslaught, to grab the bull in his mortal bite, something changed on the riverbank. The leader of the wild dog pack, who until then watched with a mixture of frustration and alarm, did something that challenged the entire logic of the predator instinct. He let out a different bark, a sharp and insistent sound, not hunting, but alert and challenge, not directed to the bull, but to the alligator. Immediately, the whole pack responded, and a choir of furious and challenging barks exploded on the riverbank. They did not retreat. Instead, they ran to the edge of the water, some even entering the shallower parts, barking and growling to the monster in the river. It was not an attack. They knew they had no chance in the water. It was a distraction, an act of noisy and furious harassment. The alligator, a predator that depends on surprise and intimidation, was caught with guard. His head turned sharply toward the source of that annoying commotion. The monster's attention was diverted from the bull, his concentration broken by the unexplainable fury of the pack. That second of hesitation was all that thunder needed. Instinct and opportunity collided in a moment of clarity. While the alligator was distracted by the dogs, the bull used his last forces to swim, not panicked but directed toward a nearby sand bank that he had not noticed before. The scene was unbelievable. The predators of the earth, for a reason that no one could understand, were effectively helping the prey that pursued moments before. The pedestrians looked at each other, their faces a mask of pure unbelief. What they were witnessing went against everything they knew about wildlife. Nature, in its infinite complexity, was showing them that its rules were much stranger and wonderful than any human could imagine. The predator of the waters, faced with an escaped bull and a crazy pack, seemed confused, his perfectly planned attack ruined by an impossible event. The commotion on the riverbank was deafening. The pack of wild dogs, driven by an instinct that no one understood there, continued his sonic bombing against the alligator. They ran along the waterfront, a barrier of sound and fury, maintaining the attention of the reptilian giant firmly fixed on them. It was not an alliance in the human sense of the word. There was no agreement, no conscious communication between the bull and the dogs. It was something deeper, more primal. Perhaps it was the hatred shared by a predator of a different domain, a territorial rivalry that transcended the normal dynamics of hunter and hunting. Or perhaps, in the mind of the pack leader, that bull was his prey, and he would not allow any other thief to steal her, even if it meant protecting him temporarily. Whatever the reason, the result was the same. Deadly enemies were, at that moment, united by a common goal, albeit unintentional. The distraction created by the dogs gave Thunder the precious time, he needed to fight the chain and reach the sandbar. His paws finally found firm soil under the water, and with a tremendous effort, he dragged out of the reach of the alligator, panting and tremendous. He was injured, exhausted, and terrified, but was alive, safe from the death that had stared at him in the depths. The alligator, seeing his meal easy to escape and still being harassed by the incessant noise of the pack, seemed to make a decision. With a last look of frustration to the bull in the sandbar, he dived silently, disappearing in the cloudy waters as mysteriously as he had emerged. The river predator admitted the defeat, perhaps deciding that effort and irritation were no longer worth it. As soon as the alligator disappeared, a strange silence fell on the scene. The pack had stopped barking almost instantly. They looked at the bull, now safe but out of their reach, across a deep water channel. The unlikely alliance, forged in the heat of the moment, dissolved as quickly as it was formed. The pedestrians watched everything, trying to soothe the impossible chain of events that had just unfolded. A brutal hunt, a desperate escape, the appearance of a monster, and finally a salvation from the most unexpected source of all. Nature had revealed one of its paradoxes, a time when the lines between friend and enemy became unrecognizably blurred. Thunder stayed in the sandbar for a long time, his heavy body rising and down with every difficult breath. He looked through the water to the bank where the pack was, and for a moment his eyes seemed to find those of the leading dog. Was there a silent understanding in that look? A recognition of the bizarre role each played in the other's drama? No one will ever know. The pack, with its hunting hopelessly lost, has not lost more time. The leader turned his back on the river and, with a subtle movement, guided the group back to the backlands. They disappeared in the vegetation as quietly as they arose, leaving behind only the echo of their barking and the memory of their inexplicable action. The hunt had ended without a clear winner, but with a story that challenged understanding. The bull was not killed, but was injured and traumatized. The pack did not eat, but had reaffirmed its dominion over the earth, even challenging the king of the river. The alligator, the supreme predator in his environment, was frustrated by a tactic that could never have anticipated. It was a day when the rules were broken, when instinct manifested itself in complex and contradictory ways. The men on the fence did not move, still absorbing the magnitude of what they had witnessed. They have seen hatred becomes an intentional help. They saw enemies joining a common threat. It was a deep lesson about the interconnection of life, how even the wildest creatures are linked by invisible wires of rivalry and survival. The story of that day would spread across the region, told around bonfires, becoming a local legend. The unlikely alliance between the bull and the pack would serve as a reminder that the natural world is much more than just a blind struggle for existence. There are nuances, there are paradoxes, there are moments of a strange and terrible beauty that challenge our simple classifications. The sun began to descend on the horizon, painting the sky with the same colors as dawn, closing the cycle of the day. Thunder, finally gathering his strength, crossed the rest of the river and slowly climbed a survivor against all probabilities. The scene left an indelible mark in the soul of every pawn who witnessed her. What they saw was not just a struggle for life, but a complex piece of natural theater, with twists that no human writer could conceive. They thought they knew the backlands, who understood the dance of life and death that happened every day around them. But that event shattered their perceptions, showing them that there were much deeper mysteries in nature than they ever imagined. How could dogs, moved by voracious hunger, choose to harass a much larger predator instead of waiting for him to kill his prey to them? Would it be a code of honor between predators? A territorial dispute that surpassed immediate hunger? Or would it be the simple refusal to allow a strange to interfere with his matters in his domain? These questions would echo in their minds for years, with no easy or definitive answers. The action of the pack was not an act of kindness, but an act of pure and indomitable instinct, complex and multifaceted. They did not save the bull. They simply interrupted the alligator. The result, however, was the same for Thunder. The image of the united, deadly enemies, even for a brief and chaotic moment against a greater threat, was powerful. It was a metaphor for so many things in human life, for unexpected alliances formed in times of crisis. The pedestrians looked at the cattle, the farm dogs, the river itself, with a new respect, a new admiration. They realized they were just observers in a much older and wise world than yours. History has become a reminder of humility, a lesson that one should never underestimate the complexity of a natural world. Survival is not only about strength and speed, but also about strategy, opportunity, and sometimes about the inexplicable acts of their enemies. That day in the ranch was not just about a bull and a pack of dogs. It was about the very web of life, intricate and unpredictable. In the weeks and months that followed, the story of the Thunder Troop hunt became the central chronicle of the farm. It was told and reteamed to the new pawns, visitors, children, and grandchildren, increasingly in more detail and admiration. It became more than a story. It became a founding myth, a legend that defined the character of that place and its creatures. The river, once only one source of water, has acquired a personality, an almost mystical status. It was the Challenge River, the place where the impossible happened. The pedestrians treated him with a new level of reverence and caution, always looking at his habited waters with a mixture of respect and fear. They knew that under that calm surface, an ancient and powerful king still reigned, and that the rules of the earth did not apply to his aquatic domain. The wild dog pack was also seen under a new light. They were still a threat, a danger to the flock, but now there was something more. There was a recognition of his complex intelligence, his instincts that went beyond the simple need to kill and eat. They were seen as a force of nature to be respected, not only feared, an essential and incomprehensible element of the Sorteo ecosystem. The legacy of that day was not just a story, but a change of perspective, an opening of mind to the complexities of the natural world. Men have learned that life is not a simple predator and prey equation, but a network of interactions, rivalries, and dependencies that challenges easy logic. They have learned that courage can be found in a lone bull, that strategy can be seen in a hungry pack, and that the mystery can emerge from the depths of a river. The memory of that event was recorded in the farm landscape itself, as permanently as the scars on Thunder leather. Each time they looked at the river, they remembered the unlikely alliance and the lesson she taught. A lesson on the resilience of life, the unpredictable nature of instinct, and the wild beauty that exists at times when the rules are broken. The legacy of Rio was an inheritance of wisdom, passed not in books, but through oral tradition, kept alive by the power of extraordinary history. Thunder survived. His wounds healed, leaving marks that told the most amazing story of all. He became a living legend on the farm, a symbol of resistance that walked between the flock. His temperament seemed to have changed. He became calmer, more observant, as if the encounter with death in two different ways had given him a new perspective on life. The other animals seemed to feel it, giving him a respectful space, recognizing the survivor he was. The pedestrians often watched him from afar, pacing peacefully near the same bank of the river that had almost been his grave. He was never seen venturing near the water, maintaining a safe distance, a lesson learned the most difficult way. His presence was a daily reminder of the drama that had unfolded, a living proof that even in the most desperate situations, hope may arise from the most unexpected source. Thunder history taught the men of the farm a lesson about the value of life and the tenacity of the spirit. He was not just a bull. He was a warrior who faced two of the most efficient predators of their respective domains and lived to tell the story. His legacy was of indomitable courage, a will to the fact that, as long as there is breath, there is struggle. Years later, when Thunder finally succumbed to old age, he was buried in a place of honor, overlooking the river. His legend, however, never died. He continued to inspire admiration and teach life and death lessons. He became immortal, not in body, but in the memory of the farm, a guardian spirit whose tale would be forever part of the soul of that place. Its history was proof that even in a world ruled by brutal laws, there is room for the miracle, to the inexplicable for grace. The legacy of Thunder and the River was ultimately a celebration of the complexity and majesty of wildlife. The farm was never the same. The men who witnessed the event were transformed by him. They developed a deeper look, a sharper appreciation for the intricate web of life around them. They have learned to read the signs of nature not only as indicators of time or danger, but as chapters of a continuous and fascinating story. The relationship between men and earth has become more respectful, less about domination and more about coexistence. They understood that they were just a small part of a much larger and more complex system, and that there was wisdom in observing and learning. The history of the bull, pack, and alligator has become a parable, used to teach younger generations about courage, respect, and the mysteries of the natural world. It served as a reminder that answers are not always simple, and that the greatest lessons often come from events that we cannot completely explain. The legacy of the river was not of fear, but of admiration. It was not about death, but about the incredible and stubborn persistence of life. It was about recognizing that in each creature, from the smallest insect to the largest predator, there is a story, a struggle, a purpose, and that sometimes these stories intersect in ways that leave us speechless, marveling at the spectacle of existence. The farm prospered not only in cattle and harvests, but in wisdom and spirit, all because of a day when the laws of nature were turned upside down. The legacy was recorded not on stone, but in people's hearts and minds, an admiration inheritance that would be forever the most valuable treasure on the farm. And so, life continued, but with a new conscience, a new appreciation for the wild and unpredictable dance that happened every day, right before his eyes. The lesson of life and death taught by the river has become the soul of the farm, a lasting echo of that impressive day.